Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Canadian-born, San Francisco-based saxophonist and composer Michael Zilber. He has been described by NEA jazz master Dave Liebman as one of the best players and compositions around anywhere. So this ex-New Yorker has 11 albums to his name as a leader or co-leader, and has performed and or recorded with many of the jazz luminaries over the years, from the likes of Liebman to Mike Clark, Steve Smith, and Bob Berg. We caught up with him about his latest 2019 CD, East-West Music for Big Bands, and his tremendous life in music. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Mike, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about your latest album, East-West Music for Big Bands, and your life in music. So talk to me about this latest CD. It's a great listen. I want to know from you, what was your aim with this project, and how do you feel it turned out?
Sure. I realized that I had some extra money, so I wanted to spend it. I'm kidding. I was not really what I literally just turned 60. My God. I've been around for a long time. And I've done a lot of projects over the years. And for the last 5 or so years, I've been playing in this excellent big band called the Electric Squeezebox Orchestra out in San Francisco, which has put out a few of its own records, led by this trumpeter Eric Jacobson. And in that band, I play lead tenor, and I also compose for the band, as does everybody else. And so even though I am not at all, by self-definition, a big band composer, I tend to write for a lot of other things much more. I looked up, and I had about 14 or 15 really good, what I thought were really good arrangements, and I wanted to memorialize it. I'd never done a big band record before and decided, well, let's do it. And then a constant theme of my life is that I'm pretty much a bi-coastal person. I go between, my family is from New York. I lived there for a long time. I've been born on the West Coast, back on the West Coast. So I wanted to do two bands, a New York band and a San Francisco band. And so that led to putting out the double CD.
Were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada.
Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how you really got involved with jazz.
I really got involved. I grew up in Vancouver. My parents met. They were social workers in Manhattan. My dad is a writer, and they moved out to Vancouver because he got a gig as a professor at the University of British Columbia, and he co-founded the creative writing department out there. And so my mom and he moved out there before I was born, and so that's why I ended up there. And then I grew up, played in the bands in high school, and almost immediately fell in love with the idea of jazz. I started playing when I was 10, and I still remember one of the very first rehearsals we did. I was playing a simple concert band piece, and the director fortunately did not hit me in the head with a baton, but because we were playing a D minor arpeggio, and I got bored with it and started making something else up. And he said, "That's cool." He stopped the whole band, and he said, "That's cool what you're doing. We call that jazz. That's great. Now don't do that right now." And the rest, I was down the road to perdition from there.
Right on. What musicians were you listening to in the beginning that really got you inspired?
Well, Charlie Parker is the obvious candidate, but I also really loved Paul Desmond because he was somebody I could transcribe. When I was 10 or 11 years old, I couldn't transcribe Charlie Parker. It was too hard. So I started getting into Paul Desmond, his first solo record with Herbie Hancock. Then, of course, I started getting into Coltrane, started getting into Wayne Shorter and Fusion, and for a brief period, I was very into Eric Dolby, and then kind of abandoned that, switched over to the tenor, and went from there. But probably a lot of the usual suspects, of course, Mike Brecker, who was, coming up when I was a youth and a teenager. Those were some of the folks I was listening to.
What was the first live jazz show you saw that made you think, man, this is what I want to do with my life?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm trying to think back. I think I saw some local cats, but I think the first show that made a real impact on me was I got to see a double bill of Stan Getz and Cannonball Adderley. That was probably the first really high-level jazz show I ever got to see, and I think I was like 13 or 14 at the time, and, by then I was getting pretty into the saxophone and was getting pretty good at it, and those guys were definitely, especially Cannonball. I remember being just blown away by Cannonball.
You talked about your early teacher, but talk to me a little bit about mentors, those that gave you advice that's resonated all the way up till today in you.
Well, sure. I mean, I think I would start with my father, who was an extraordinary man, wise and thoughtful and full of integrity and believed in the creative process and believed in doing the work. And a couple of my early teachers were very helpful. But I guess in terms of, as I started to develop as a player, the three mentors who were most important to me were the great saxophone teacher, Joe Allard. I don't know if you know who he is or not.
Yeah.
Who, of course, taught everybody from Brecker to Liebman to Harry Carney to Eric Dolphy. And I got to study with him for 3 years at the New England Conservatory. And he was very helpful to me. Joe was all about sound and production, and he was just great. I had this fantastic composition teacher named Robert D. Dominica, who was very close with Gunther Schuller in the third stream movement. He was a great composer, so he was a great composition teacher in Boston. And then Dave Liebman, who started off as a mentor and a teacher, and we eventually became playing colleagues and friends, and he's helped me tremendously. So probably those two were my three big musical mentors.
So what do you like best about being a musician?
Playing it, man, and writing it. There's no other feeling like it. It's hard to describe to somebody who doesn't do it, but when it's really happening, and then right after that, the way we all feel when we listen to music, how wonderful it makes us feel, when you can actually get up there and do a version of it, it's hard to describe, but it's a feeling like none other I've experienced. Because somebody described jazz once as total concentration and total relaxation at the exact same time for the musician. And I think that's a good description, because you have to be completely in the moment, but also like with cat-like reflexes, ready to go wherever it needs to go. You need to be able to execute incredibly precisely on these complex changes in rhythms, and at the same time be open and take it where it moves you. It's just an amazing, that's what I love about it. And also the camaraderie. There's nothing like musicians. We have a unique, twisted sense of humor, so it's a good thing.
In life we have these moments that get us closer to, I don't know, spirituality, a surreal sense, just these moments in our lives. As a musician, was there a show that you had that you got off stage and thought, wow, you were just moved?
Oh yeah, there's any number of them that have happened, including some quite. I would say that in terms of a playing situation, that happens fairly frequently. One of the more recent ones, I did two recently, which I really enjoyed a lot, or three actually. One was I did a few shows with the great bass player Ben Allen when he came out here, and with Steve Cardenas. And we really had a great time. One show in particular I thought was just very empathic and intuitive, and we were really tuned in with each other. That was fantastic. My big band CD release out here in Berkeley, California, we were sold out, turning people away, and the band was just on, and it couldn't have gone better. That was a real peak experience recently. And then I recently played a gig with this great drummer who came through town who hired me named Uran Israel. I did his gig at the Piedmont Piano in Oakland, and that was another good peak experience, and also did a tribute to Billy Strayhorn for 2 nights up in Vancouver at the end of December. And so those are recent peak musical experiences. They happen, fairly frequently, because I'm in a fortunate position where I only have to do the gigs I like, which is nice, and the music I want to do. And also, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I guess I want to kind of piggyback off of that and ask you this. Well, just kind of a newer set of questions. You have been around the block. You said you turned 60. And I want to know this. If you have a dream tonight, run into your younger self, like say in your late 20s, early 30s, what advice would you give your younger self after all of these years and wisdom that you've accumulated?
I think that it's interesting that it's 2020 and it's aptly named as hindsight. There are things there are decisions I made that if I knew then what I know now, I would have made a different decision. But if I knew now what I knew then, I would have made the same decision I made back then. So to be more specific, when I had just turned 32, my first wife and I were in New York. It was a very dangerous place. We had just become pregnant, and I got offered this tenure-track college gig out here in California. And it seemed to make a lot of sense to me at the time. My family lived on the West Coast. Her family lived on the West Coast. And we took the gig. And there's been a lot that's been wonderful about it. I've led a very good life. I've been financially secure. The job has not been stressful. I've got to teach young people about music and jazz. But if I had to do it all over again, if I came back from today, I would have said, hang in there, Mike. Stay in New York. You know, you'll probably be able to get a college gig in New York, and so have your cake and eat it there too. And, you know, honestly, it's just, for me, musically, it's the place where my heart, or a large part of my heart, will always be.
What's next for you, or what do you want to do as you kind of continue your career and hit these new levels? Is there anything that's really on your radar that you want to get done, that you want to do?
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, I started writing out a sort of a bucket list of projects I wanted to do while I still could. This big band thing was one of them. I want to do a piece for jazz quartet and string orchestra. I want to do a set of songs. My father loved the old American songbook songs, so I want to do my reworkings of those for him. I've got a project here called the John and Paul Project, where we've reimagined a whole bunch of John Lennon and Paul McCartney songs, and that's going to come up the horizon. I've got a quartet project with Mike Clark that we're going to be putting a record out very soon. So there's a lot of stuff on the horizon for me. And basically, as I'm winding down, I'm only going to have to be teaching at my college for about another year or two. My current wife's son is graduating from high school, so we're going to have a lot more freedom to travel, spend more time in New York. My son lives in L.A., so we're going to be spending more time down there. So just a lot more freedom to travel and gig and see the world. So trying to do a version of that.
Why do you love jazz?
I love jazz on a number of levels. I don't know. Why does anybody love jazz? I love jazz because of how it makes me feel when I listen to it, how it makes me feel when I play it at its highest. I mean, just in the last week, I got to hear 2 fantastic bands, which just made me smile from ear to ear. There was the Larry Golding, Bill Stewart, Peter Bernstein group that came through. Bill Stewart's an unbelievable drummer. And then just last night, I got caught to hear Steve Gadd's group and get to hear the original gangster Steve Gadd playing. So when you can hear people the thing about jazz is you can stay young your whole life, you can be inventive, you can be creative, and how it makes me feel to play, how it makes me feel to write, how it makes me feel to listen is, as I said before, is an inexpressible feeling. And it's something that I really sometimes wish that people who couldn't play could experience it just so they would know. I know how good it feels to listen to it. I imagine that even if you can't play, if you don't know anything about how to play, it still feels wonderful. But if you can play it as well, it's just a delicious experience. It's spiritual, it's sacred, it's profane, it's all of those things. The empathy, the communication. There's a lot of reasons I like jazz.
So my final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception or their version of who they think you are, your family, your friends, students, fans. But you live your life. Who do you think you are?
These are good questions. You ask everybody these questions? I think you must.
Variations, yeah.
Yeah. Who do I think I am? I think I am always in the process of becoming. I'm a pretty reflective person, actually a fairly introverted person, believe it or not, and like to listen and observe and trying to grow and be a better human being and a better musician and try to treat people with the dignity and thoughtfulness and respect I would like to be treated with, and it's a work in progress. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does.
Yeah.
Every single answer is the right answer. And Mike, thank you for taking a minute out to speak with me here at the show. It's been illuminating. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Canada, San Francisco, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Michael for his wisdom, time, and music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.